We are at war. War. More dangerous than any military army, more dangerous than any country's forces, even more violent than any terrorist organization. We have an enemy, an adversary, who is seeking to rob, steal, and destroy in your life. He is, of course, Satan and his henchmen, the fallen angels, which we know as demons, who are at war against you. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 13 says, "For we walk in the flesh, but we do not war according to the flesh." Paul says, although we live in the physical realm, the war that we fight as Christians, the war that's taking place over our lives, is one of a spiritual realm. You see, there is a spiritual war that's going on over our lives, over countries, over this world. And so when you see the evilness that's taking place with the wars and the acts of terror that are taking place even in our own backyard and around the country, you can know that behind that, there is a spiritual battle going on that's influencing the physical realm, but a spiritual battle ultimately with the purpose to rob, steal, and destroy, to pull you to the pit of hell. You see, Satan knows where he's headed. He already lost the battle. When Jesus died on the cross and rose again, he claimed victory over sin and death. So Satan is headed to a place that was created for him and the fallen angels, hell. Not created for any human beings, but Satan, knowing where he's going, is trying to pull as many people down as he can with him. Like the pool party that you've been at before. And you have your phone, your nice iPhone Plus 6, whoop-de-doo, in your pocket, your wallet, your keys, everything. And you're standing by the pool, hanging out, talking, having fun. And then you see this look in a few people's faces that are walking towards you. You know what this look is. It's a devious look. It's a look that has been spawned in the pit of hell. It's the look that they are going to throw you in the pool. You know what they're going to do. So they come at you, they grab you, and you're going to do whatever you can. So you're pushing them off. Come on, guys, stop. You start punching people in the face. Whatever's necessary to keep you from going in my hair, it's did, I can't get it wet, whatever it might be. But there comes a time where enough join in, you are now picked up upside down over the water. You know you're going in. So what do? You do exactly that. And that's how I know you do it. You grab as many people as possible, because if you're going in, they're going in too. You're not going in alone. And you see, that's the same thing that Satan does. He knows where he's headed, to the pit of hell. And so now he's trying to gather as many as he can. If he's going down, he wants to bring as many down as he possibly can. So there's a spiritual realm that's waging war over your life. And you see, I share that with you today because the first step to conquering your enemy is realizing that you have one. You see, that's why Peter in his first letter writes to us in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, to be sober, alert, aware, to be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. You see that word seeking, it's a Greek word that means to desire, or in this context, to plot against. Satan desires, is plotting against you. See, in ancient days, this word was used to describe what we now call reconnaissance. You see, in those days, with a castle or walls around a city, they would send spies into the city during the day while the gates were open. And the spies would go in and they would just watch. They would study. They would look to see where the walls were most weak at, where it would be most easy for the enemy to penetrate, to break down the walls, to get in. Not only where, but then when. Perhaps a time when the walls would be least guarded. So where it's weak and when it's weak. You see, Satan does the same thing. He's watching us. He's doing reconnaissance on our lives. And he's watching to see when you're weak. You see, Satan knows when you're weak, when you didn't get up extra early to spend some time with the Lord in devotions and reading your word and praying, when you're overtired and haven't been getting enough sleep, like I have with our kids being a little bit sick and teething, bad combination, not enough sleep. He knows when you're weak physically. And even when you're weak physically, it's easier to fall spiritually. And he also knows when you're weak spiritually, when you haven't been doing those things. But not only when, church, he knows where. The areas of your life that you have current struggles in. And so he'll attack when you're weak, where you're weak, in order to get you to stumble. And Satan, Jesus said to Peter in Luke chapter 22, verse 31, desires to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. You see, that Greek word not only means one of reconnaissance, but it means one of desire. Satan desires you so that he can destroy you. And he's driven by this desire to destroy your life, watching and waiting to see where to attack. And so Peter tells us to be aware, to be sober, to be vigilant, because we have an adversary whom he is seeking to devour. In other words, church, we need to watch where we walk, to be aware of where we walk and how we walk. And although it may be eye-opening to you, or even perhaps some a little bit frightening to you that we have an adversary that's watching us, studying us to attack us, perhaps you're taken back a little bit because of that. Listen, there's great hope for you today. Something that we can have great confidence in is that Jesus Christ already won, that he has the victory. He has already defeated the enemy. So that when we are with him, walking closely with him, we will have victory. But when we go and try to fight on our own, we will find ourselves losing the battle horribly. So all we have to do is stay close to the one whom already won the battle. The war that we are in has already been won. But just like in World War I and World War II, and especially in World War II, that there were thousands upon thousands of casualties after the war. People were still killing people after the war was over. And so too, although the war is over, Satan is still trying to pull down as many as he possibly can. But take hope in this. What Jude shares with us in Jude verse 24. Now to him, Jesus, who has had victory, he is able to keep you from stumbling. He is able to keep you from stumbling. Jesus is able, more than able, to keep us from falling away, from stumbling. Now, although we are at war with the enemy, and the enemy is looking to trip you up, to get you to fall, God is able to keep you from falling. So no matter what you have in your life, God is the only one able to keep you from falling. You might have all sorts of other crutches in your life to keep you walking with God. You might have a parent that's telling you that you have to go to church on Sunday with us, and they're trying to keep you from falling away. You might have a son or a daughter that asks you because they want to go to the Our Kids ministry, and so they ask you to bring them to church. You might have a friend that brings you or encourages you in the Lord. You might even have a brother or sister that's trying to keep you from stumbling. But listen, no one, no thing can keep you from stumbling other than the Lord. And he is able. You see, we tried to keep him from stumbling. We tried to keep him from jumping off. Talking about my brother. You see, my brother Garrett was about 13. I was about 9. And we lived out what we considered the country for Southern California. Deep in Vista, before Vista was all built out, we lived down there for about 4 years on a couple of acres. And the guy that lived at the house before we moved in built this tree house, this massive tree house, about 15 to 17 feet up in this massive tree over this extra garage that was in the back. And so many a time we would play hide and go seek or tag or pelt them with dirt clods, or we had wrist rockets, and if you got shot, you were it. And many a times we would find ourselves, the best place to hide would be in the treehouse. But the problem was there was only one way up and one way out. And so if you went up there, if they decided to climb the sketchy ladder that was built and enabled onto the tree, up all the way to the treehouse, we didn't often, because if you climbed all the way up, it was a waste of time to get back down. But if you found them in there, there was no way to get out. You were trapped. So my brother Torrin, who was about 11 at this time, I was 9, my oldest brother was 13. Torrin was about 11, and he had this, what he thought was a genius idea. Now, he's never really had any good ideas ever, but every idea he thinks is a great one, spoken like a true brother. So this great idea he had was to tie a rope to this branch, this big branch that stemmed out from the treehouse. And so if he got caught, he could jump out the back door and swing to safety, to escape, kind of like an emergency exit plan. And so he had this idea. We found him in the treehouse. So he stands out and is about to walk off the ledge. And my brother and I see this. We tell him, no, and especially our oldest brother, Garrett, he saw what was going to happen. He said, Torrin, don't step off. If you do, listen, you're going to swing from there, and you're going to swing, and you're going to hit this other branch. You're going to nail it hard, and you're going to fall down. So don't go. Don't go. And he pleaded. He warned him specifically, directly, don't swing off. But my brother, rather than being tagged or pelted, whichever one we were playing that day, decided he was going to swing. And so he stepped off the ledge, and sure enough, just as Garrett said it was going to happen, he swung off. He nailed this branch. I mean, he nailed it hard. I mean, any other time it would have been a laughing matter. But then that day, it wasn't. He nailed it hard. And luckily, almost miraculously, because he wrapped the rope around his arm in such a way, he kind of unraveled down to the ground. So he didn't fall to the rocks below. He kind of unraveled down until the rope wrapped around his arm in such a way that it snagged him, and he was hanging about 6 inches off the ground. Now, I grabbed a big rock, stuck it under his feet, and saved his life. Still my claim to fame for his entire life. Saved your life, bro. But you see, my oldest brother, he saw it gonna happen. He warned him, don't step off, don't walk that way, don't go that way, because if you do, you're gonna nail a branch, it's gonna cause pain. And it's not going to be like what you thought it was going to be. You see, in the same way, we have a warning. We have a warning from God. Don't walk that way. Don't step that way. Don't go that way. Because if you do, it's going to cause you unneeded pain. It's going to cause things in your life that God does not intend for you to experience. And so you can try to keep someone from falling. You can try really hard to keep them from going. But listen, God is the only one that's able to keep us from falling. And if God is able to keep us from falling, then we won't fall. He is able. But you might be here today and say, if God is truly able to keep me from falling, then why did I fall? Why did I stumble? Why did I trip up? Why did I fall into that sin? If he is able, then why didn't he keep me from falling? Listen, I do not believe that if you are a believer, that you can fall into sin. I do not believe that you can fall into sin, because it says that God is able to keep you from falling, to keep you from stumbling. He is able, and if God is able to do it, then it's not like, oh, I dropped one. No, God is able to keep you from falling. But what I do believe is that you can make the decision to jump into sin or walk in a direction towards sin in what we call compromise as a Christian, where you begin to compromise one step at a time until you are at that ledge, and God is warning you, saying, don't go, because if you do, like my brother Torrin from that treehouse that day, it's going to cause some unnecessary pain. You're going to be in grave danger. Don't do it. But we still have the decision whether we are going to walk in that direction or not. And every step that we take either in sin or towards sin in compromise, God is there every step of the way, giving us a way of escape. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 that says this, and I want to read it to you from the NLT. The temptation in your life are no different from what others experience. So the temptations that you face is what everybody faces. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. He will not allow any temptation to be more than what you can stand. To keep you from stumbling, to keep you from falling, He will not allow a temptation to take you out. He will keep you standing. You won't fall. But when you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. You see, every step of the way, God is giving us a way out, a way of escape. See, you don't fall into sin. But for those that would say, you know what, I can walk in that direction. I can stand on the line. I can live on the fence. I can play with fire. I can go there. I can do that. I'll be okay. For those that begin to walk in that direction, you see, God will keep you from falling. But if you continue to walk in a direction that the Word of God continues over and over and over again to warn you about, to say, stay away from that. Don't even go there. Don't look at that. You are in the world, but don't be of the world. Don't find yourself doing the things that the world does. Be different. Be set apart. Be sanctified. God gives us warning after warning after warning, saying don't step off, because if you do, this is what's going to happen to you in your life. But if we find ourselves say, no, I can do it. I don't think that will really happen. Or I'm strong enough. I can handle it. I can go to that bar. I'm strong enough to handle it. I can drink a couple and throw a couple back with some friends, or have a couple glasses of wine. It's elegant. You know, I'm mature enough not to get drunk though. I can hang out with that promiscuous person. You know, we're just hanging out, you know, going on a few dates. I'm not planning on marrying them after all. You know, just occupying my time. I'm strong enough to not really fall into compromise. Or I can listen to that music. I know there's explicit language and sexual connotation, and I know it's talking about things that aren't pleasing to the Lord, but I really like the beats. And so I just focus on the beats, and I've been walking with the Lord long enough to know that won't affect me. Or many say, you know what, I can see that movie. I can watch that on the big screen or in the privacy of my own screen. We're just all adults here. Yeah, there's a scene of nudity in it, but you know what? It's not like I've never seen a naked person before. I'm an adult. You know, it's not going to affect me in such a way. Listen. Don't miss this. Listen. It's only a matter of time when you begin to meddle in sin that you will find yourself bound by sin. It's only a matter of time. And when you begin to compromise with that fire, with what the Word of God, out of God's love for you, warns you about and says, don't go there. Okay, you're strong, you say. But God says, don't do it. But you say, I can anyway. There's only a matter of time when you begin to meddle in something that you will find yourself bound in it. Let me show you how I know that to be true. Turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 14. 2 Kings chapter 14. We are given a biblical principle that proves this point powerfully. A principle in 2 Kings chapter 14, talking about a king whose name was Amaziah. Now, Amaziah was the king of Judah. Judah was the kingdom of God's chosen people in the south. There was a second kingdom because there was a time where the God's chosen people, the people of Israel, were divided into two kingdoms. Judah in the south, Israel in the north. Now, Amaziah is the king of Judah in the south. And in verse 2, it tells us that he was 25 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned for 29 years. And it says in 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 3, and he, Amaziah, did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He's 25 years old, and he's doing what's right in the sight of the Lord. But time begins to go on. He's reigning in totality for 29 years. And a time comes where he begins not to be solely committed to the Lord. As it goes on to say, yet, not like his father David. He did everything as his father Joash had done. What did David do? David made sure that he got rid of all of idol worship. All the tabernacles and memorials that were built to pagan gods and places that were pagan idols were worshiped and sacrifices were given. David made sure they were torn down. Why? Because David was a man after God's own heart. He had the heart after God. He had a heart that desired God and loved God. Although he fell greatly, although he walked into sin more accurately, although he chose to disobey God in immorality, he still had a heart that longed for God. And because of that, God was able to restore him. But Amaziah, he did as Joash had done. You see, Joash and Amaziah both started strong, but neither of them finished strong. And it's because they allowed idol worship to creep back into the kingdom. They had idols in the kingdom. Idols, things that were in place of God, are more important to them than obedience to God. And so Amaziah, in verse 4, did not take the high places down. It says, however, the high places were not taken away. That is, the places that idol worship was conducted on. And the people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. You see, Amaziah was allowing idolatry. And because he allowed idolatry in his life, because he began to make compromises, he started off real strong. But because he began to make compromises, I want you to see what happens in verse 7. He goes to battle against the Edomites, and it says in verse 7, he killed 10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt and took Selah by war and called its name Joktheel to this day. Amaziah once was set apart for the Lord, but then not really fully surrendered to the Lord, but then goes to battle against the Edomites, and what happens? He has great victory in his life. He still has great victory, although he was compromising initially. Nothing changed in his life. Although he was making compromises with idolatry, he was still experiencing great victory. He was compromising, but still having great victory. He wasn't fully committed to the Lord, but still having great victory, and you may be in that place today. You may say, you know what, I love the Lord, and I'm doing what's right in the Lord's sight. I'm doing what's right. But in your heart, it's more than the actions that you do. In your heart, you're making compromises. There's other things that are more important to you, or that you're not willing to give up to be fully surrendered to the Lord or used by the Lord. There's things that you want to still have that are your things that I want to have. That you mandate and say, I'm not willing to give up. And we can allow idols into our lives. Compromising. Even if it's just a little bit, living on the fence, playing with fire, walking that fine line, or trying to stay in the gray area. Oh, that's just a gray area. That's just a gray issue. And you would rather live in the gray area than run to the light and be as close to Christ as you possibly can. And because of that, maybe perhaps you haven't experienced anything changing in your life. I'm still doing what's right. I'm still having victory over those things. Still not fallen completely in my life, but watch what will eventually happen. Verse 8, then Amaziah sent messengers to Jehoash, the son of Jehoaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, "Come, let us face one another in battle." He sends a message now to King Jehoash, who was the king of the northern kingdom, the king of Israel. And he says, hey, let's go to battle. I'm feeling good about myself. But then Jehoash sends this message back in verse 9. So Jehoash, king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, "The thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, 'Give your daughter to my son as wife.' And a wild beast that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thistle." What is this king saying to Amaziah? He's saying this: Lebanon was known for their great cedar. That's why when they built the temple, Solomon's temple that he built, David imported the cedar from Lebanon. It was like the California redwood, just these massive trees. And so King Jehoash says to King Amaziah, listen, you're like a little thistle, like a little twiggy. Hey, Twiggy, you know what you're doing, Twiggy? You're coming into the California redwoods as a little twig and making demands. In other words, who do you think you are trying to go to battle against us? He says to them, you'll be crushed like a beast trampling that thistle. Then he goes on to say in verse 10, you have indeed defeated Edom, and your heart has lifted you up. So glory in that and stay at home. For why should you, watch this, don't miss this, verse 10, second half, why should you meddle with trouble so that you fall, and Judah with you? Why are you doing this? Stay at home. I know you think you're real strong, you can handle it because you've had some victories now and you're feeling really good about yourself. But why do you want to go where you ought not to go and engage in this battle that you ought not to be in? So just stay at home. Why do you want to meddle with this problem that would cause you to fall? And Amaziah, look at verse 11, would not heed. He wouldn't listen. He would not listen to the warnings who the king, King Jehoash, gave him directly. Don't do this. Don't go there. Stay home. He warned him directly, but King Amaziah would not listen to him. And he meddled in what he was warned directly to stay out of. He didn't listen to the warning of the king. We've been warned. We've been warned, church. We've been warned, my family. I care so much about you. And I have to give you this warning today. Not by the King Amaziah, but by the King of Kings we've been warned. Certain things to stay away from. What not to do and what to do. Because God has great things for you in your life. And knows the pain if you step off that ledge, if you go there thinking, oh, it won't affect me. I've had victory. I can be strong. But finding yourself falling because you stepped in that direction of compromise. One step after another after another. Listen, King Jesus says, don't be like the world, but be set apart from the world. But many of us live our lives, our Christian lives, trying to be as much like the world as we possibly can, doing all that the world does and trying to still be good with God. And so we're given a warning to stay away. For those that would say, I can go there, I can do that, I can consume that, I can be with that person, I can engage in those acts, and I can be strong enough to not let it overtake me. Listen, King Amaziah didn't fall into defeat. He didn't fall into defeat. He walked into defeat. And when you meddle where we ought not to go, when we engage in things that we ought not to do, listen, 3 things will always happen quickly. I want to give these to you. Write them down, and I'll send you on your way. 3 things. Number 1, the walls are brought down. Look at verse 13. Then Jehoash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, the son of Ahaziah, at Beth Shemesh, and he went to Jerusalem, and he broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. Amaziah was defeated that day, brutally, badly beaten. And so King Jehoash goes there and now breaks down the walls. Listen, when you meddle where you ought not to be, the walls are brought down. What do I mean by that? There is a protection that God has given to you in your life. It's the voice of the Spirit. It's the gift of discernment. It's the conscience that he has given to us. But when you continue to go further down that path, ignoring the way of escape and saying that I can handle it, listen, eventually the walls come down. The walls of defense come down. You see, the first time that you participated in that act, that thing, or went to that place, you felt uneasy. You were on guard. The first time you did that, you were shocked, even repulsed by it. You were up all night thinking about it, regretting it. But because you did it once, it was easier to do it again, and the walls, a couple bricks came down, the walls got a little bit lower, and the enemy was so much easier to overcome those lower walls. And then time and time again, now the walls are broken down completely, where you no longer are shocked or repulsed by it, but now you are accepting it. That's just what I do. I don't believe personally, you say, or we say, I don't believe that it's really that big of a deal. I don't really believe that. Let me ask you today, what do you base your belief on? Could it be that your walls have been knocked down and you are no longer listening to the word of God and the voice of the Lord that he would want to speak into your life? You see, it's the same thing that happens with the frog in the frying pan. You see, you put a frog in a pan of boiling water, the first thing that frog will do will jump out. He realizes if he stays in that, he will die. But if you put a frog in a pan of lukewarm water, he'll stay there, lukewarm. And if you turn the heat on low and begin to bring that water up to a boil, the frog won't even notice it and he will boil to death. And the same is true for us. If we are placed in the fire, a lot of times we're like, I got to get out of here. This is bad. But if Satan can get us living a lukewarm lifestyle by the things that we do and participate in and engage in, we will find ourselves boiling to death, if you will. Satan trying to destroy our lives spiritually, and the walls will be coming down. The walls are brought down. Secondly, when you meddle in or go where you ought not to, number 2, precious treasure is always lost. Look at verse 14. And Jehoash, he took all the gold and silver, all the articles that were found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the king's houses, and hostages, and returned to Samaria. Number 2, when you meddle where you shouldn't and do what you ought not, precious treasure is lost. The defenses are gone, and then we become more vulnerable. And then treasure is lost. Treasure is always lost when we engage in sin. Things that are precious to us, like purity, like holiness, those are lost. Listen, sin is always forgiven, but treasure is lost as a consequence. And treasure will be taken. And last, when you meddle in or go where you ought not to go, number 3, people will become prisoners. Look at the very end of verse 14. And hostages were taken. Hostages were taken. You see, in sin, when we mess around with sin or try to live on the line of sin, when we do those things or go those places and engage in those things that we are warned about, when we engage in that, the walls first are brought down. We are no longer sensitive to the sin or being in those places that would cause us to fall into sin. Then precious treasure is taken from us. The things that were once precious to us, like family, like purity, are now gone. And we will find ourselves being a prisoner in it. It was said that the chains of sin are too light to feel until they are too strong to be freed from. The chains of sin are too light to feel. And because you can't feel them, it doesn't come to a point until they're strong enough where we can't be freed from them. For example, if I took a spool of thread and I wrapped the spool of thread, just one string around your wrist, just one time to bind you. man, you would have no problem, man or woman, breaking that string off. I mean, watch how macho you are. Just rah, like Hulk Hogan, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Pastor Brennan, any of those guys. You just break it off. But listen, if I kept going around your wrist time and time and time again, I used that entire spool of that little weakling thread on you, there would come a point where you no longer could break that thin little thread. And the same is true in our lives. You might say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, so you engage in it, go there, and it's one time around, and then another time, and then another time. And there will come a time where you will find yourself now bound in that very thing that you were compromising in. And we can say, I'm strong enough to handle it, but in reality, each time that you take that in, each time you go to that place, each time walls are coming down, treasure is being lost, and you will find yourself being bound in that sin. You will be bound by it, bound to it, and eventually bound in it. And before you know it, you will find yourself a prisoner. You see, people that have experienced great victory in their life that have been freed. I'm free, I'm free. And you can say, I have my freedoms because I am free. Freedom in the Bible is never used to express freedom in such a way that would be potential to bring you back into bondage. And you say, I have the freedom. But what you really mean is I have the freedom to compromise, which the Bible never gives us that freedom to do. Because God did not free you, church, so that you would find yourself bound again. Don't be like Amaziah, who had great victory in his life. But because he had a great victory, he went where he shouldn't. He meddled where he ought not. And because he meddled with those problems, it caused him to fall. He meddled so that he would fall. You see, when we meddle and fall into sin, God is there to say, I'll give you a way of escape. I'll give you a way out. But I have a better way. Don't engage in that. Don't do that. Don't meddle in it. Turn from that. And each step of the way, the Lord is giving us a way out when we continue to walk down that path.